Hi, I'm Deep.
I'm Jose.
And we're your token theater friends, people who love theater so much that we're sitting in a room with no air conditioning and it's difficult. Life is difficult right now. See how shiny Jose is?
First world problems. Today we are talking to Scott Sheppard and Jennifer Kidwell, the performers and creators of Underground Railroad game, which is one of our favorite pieces of the last years. And the New York Times recently named one of the 25 best American plays since Angels in America. And I think it's even actually better than Angels in America.
I agree. But then again, we're not big fans of Angels in America. Please do not kill us, Tony Kushner fans.
Scott and Jennifer are part of Lightning Rod Special, the Philadelphia-based theater company that if you are watching our episodes every month, as we hope you are, you remember a few episodes ago we interviewed Alice York, who created The Appointment. So they're just making all the most exciting work in America, I feel.
And it's all comedies about really uncomfortable topics. Like The Appointment was a comedy about abortion, and Underground Railroad Game is a comedy about race and slavery. So fun times ahead. Let's go to the interview.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're bringing back the show that we both love so much. But for the people who have no idea what it is, can you describe what Underground Railroad Game is?
It's a two-person show that centers around a lesson about the Underground Railroad. So that there's two teachers who are teaching a Civil War thematic unit in their middle school in Hanover, Pennsylvania, which is where Scott grew up. And so in order to teach this lesson, they have created this game for the students to play. And the game, as we lay it out in the piece, is a game that Scott played as a student that his teachers created for him to play as a student in Hanover School in the 90s. And the piece sort of moves from moments in history or historical reenactments, to the present day and what is happening between these two teachers.
I feel like Underground Railroad Game, people have a difficult time deciding whether or not it's a play or a performance or a piece of theater, because it doesn't follow, it sometimes seems to follow some traditional playwriting patterns or a kind of narrative arc, but actually it often doesn't. It's kind of structured like Russian dolls. So you're kind of diving deeper into something or through something, and that something is the psyche of these two characters, the psyche of America, the layers of representation of our history, and the kind of the failure to represent that history and the failure to represent how we represent that history. So yeah, it kind of cascades into moments of surreal action, moments of deep artifice, and then also kind of like these moments of theatricalized fiction where you're in a school, these two teachers are teaching a group of students, the audience being cast as those students at different times.
I didn't want to say that because usually you tell me not to say that. But I just realized too, yes, and it's a series of performances that deal with the way that we narrativize history. And so that's why it's hard to describe, because it's like in a very slippery way, a kind of meta-theatrical piece. It's like looking at how we choose to perform the present and looking at how we choose to perform the past, and how that choice then actually exposes what is really happening between people.
Scott, it was inspired by the game you played in middle school. And so how did you come to Jen saying, hey, I want to do this really uncomfortable thing?
Well, it was there. In my history, in my past, as a student, I went through this phase where in my middle school where we were studying history, and in my town, there's a popular reenactment culture because there, Civil War is caught up in a kind of tourism industry. People going and traveling to see where the battles are. So there's this very, on one hand, there's this kind of love of history. There are lots of history buffs who know all the facts. And there's a kind of romanticism that goes along with that. And so it becomes a really interesting way of looking at America's kind of inability to grapple with its own horrifying, troubled, complicated past, because at once you're kind of wedded to it and there's an attraction to know about it and understand it, and on the other hand there's an inability to face it, and there's a kind of, we are repelled from wanting to look at it. And I think the way that I presented it to Jen was in the context of school. We were studying this very specific kind
This
of...
is the story that I do remember. But
Well, I'm going to tell my own version. But we were studying Buffon, which is this kind of clown. Buffon delves in like deep tragedy and comedy at the same time. And so out of that unit and studying that kind of work, we were interested in the possibility of creating a satire about it, and what a satire could accomplish, and what is the what can comedy achieve, or what kind of doors can comedy unlock for our self-awareness, or as we start to kind of like grapple with these really tricky issues around history. So we kind of dove into an exploration around this circumstance, thinking that it was going to be like ferociously funny, and in a way that put the audience kind of on some kind of trial, or at least not even that they were going to be on trial, but we were just going to kind of implicate them in some ways.
You had told the story about playing the game really late one night, and I was just like, this is crazy. And then you were going to make a solo, and then we were supposed to be making a dance piece, and that didn't work.
Yeah.
So you were like, we should do this instead. But I think this thing that you were saying about implicating the audience didn't really crack open for us until we went to go see a talk. So then we, decided to work on this thing. We're doing research, and we went to go see a talk at the Portrait Gallery, which is a federally funded situation in Philadelphia. And this gentleman was giving a talk about the Underground Railroad, but kept stumbling over the enslaved people. So he hadn't landed on how to describe black people. And that I think too is in this thing of like really, he's a historian, and ostensibly it prepared him to speak. I love how I'm saying this now. You're like, so what's the show about? And I'm like, I don't know. But I will speak about this federally funded historian who could not speak about enslavement without stumbling over his words. That to us seemed really emblematic of this huge faux pas, this huge problem in pedagogy, in which teachers would think it was a good idea to have dolls meant to represent people in order to teach about objectification. So his inability to deal with the past, even though that was literally his job, his federally funded job, became like a launching point for, that's what can happen to people who, and I think it's hard to be honest, right? That's what
Jennifer, I read in an interview that you, when you were a teenager, you played the violin.
I did. Do you want to hear a very exciting story?
Yes, please.
I think that I played the violin in this building when I was 13.
Whoa! It's homecoming then.
A
right?
little bit.
But and you said that you quit playing the violin because of anxiety during performances, and yet here you are, a theater artist. So what did you find in theater that playing classical
My palms
music?
are sweating now.
Yeah.
I don't. The anxiety has not subsided. It's like different, and like when you're playing the violin, like if you're shaking, then it you can't play, and so I can be shaky now and still perform, but the anxiety has stayed with me. is a little different now, and I see it coming, but there's no, and in fact, I'm looking to pick the violin back up now that I'm like, I just get stage fright. And there's a part of me that doesn't really like people watching me, and then another part of me that really likes people watching me.
So you've all performed this show all over the world, and how race relations are different, and so how have the different audiences reacted to it, and have you found that there is something that universal that translates and other things that don't?
Mm-hmm. The show takes a lot of things for granted, takes some points of view for granted, and in communities where that assumption isn't held or isn't a safe assumption, the show can cause some real distress. We definitely took the show to one community, and we did a talk back, and somebody during the talk back said, "What are the ethics of traumatizing your audience?" And we were like, this is not meant to be traumatic. But when using humor as a device, because, I guess I've just been thinking about this a lot recently, what conditions need to be met in order for something to be funny, and in order for someone to be able to perform laughter publicly, those conditions just don't always exist. And so when they don't, it's actually quite upsetting for people and quite a turnoff, the show. I would say one of the most incredible responses was this woman came up to us after seeing the show in DC, and she told us that she had seen it initially in New York and really disliked it a lot, and had a lot of discussions about it afterwards with other people, and I think she was talking about a friend who also wasn't really into it, but it stuck in her craw enough for her to come back and see it, so that would have been almost a year and a half later in DC, and she was so glad that she took the time to stay after the show and come up to us and tell us that after the second time and the fact that it had stuck with her and she had been mulling it over, that her reaction to it was quite different.
I got the sense in Australia that people were fans of America, but also were very aware of all of our problems and have that kind of love-hate relationship with our country that lots of people have. But in Australia, there was something really amazing about their access to our culture enough to kind of follow the piece. Maybe they wouldn't pick up every little Easter egg that we would drop about American history or something, but they had enough access to the culture that they really followed the piece. But also, they were able to kind of laugh at America and the kind of faux pas and the mistakes we were making and those characters were making. And it was just enough of a distance from their own problems, but also it was a kind of analogous to and in correspondence with their own, that it was, I don't know, I felt like it was the right distance for them to kind of, by the end of the piece, be able to say, oh, and also us.
You've talked about how, this part of the Civil War is the part that most people feel comfortable talking about because it's about saving people, right? And this is a very cliche question, but what are some of the most, disturbing things that you learned about, the Underground Railroad doing your research that you would love for people to realize that it wasn't just magical, saving people and taking them to the North?
What are some the most disturbing things?
What's something that shocked you, about doing your research that you wish people knew?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that it wasn't a codified system. So nobody that was participating in that, what in some senses is a rebellion, in other senses is, the way for people to be. It wasn't there was no map.
Right.
It wasn't codified. It wasn't a club. We always capitalize the letters, right? As though it's a proper noun. You open a textbook, you start reading about enslavement, and then in the very next page it's but the Underground Railroad, and it's that wasn't brave people who were like largely unrecognized, and there's no map laid out for you. Here's something that makes me really upset that keeps happening. The NPR just reported Harriet Tubman was not freed. Harriet Tubman freed herself. That's something that I would like for everybody to remember.
Yeah. I was not so keenly aware of how when we are studying history, we are studying marketing campaigns that were created by groups of people to get their message out to achieve these ulterior motives, right? Like all of these kind of tropes and narratives that end up becoming movies, that end up becoming fictions, those often misrepresent a lot of the things that were happening by kind of turning one story or several parts of stories into a kind of a campaign to achieve, into like a political campaign to make it seem like the South wanted to separate from the North, and that had very little to do with slavery, when actually the word comes up in like every, when they're actually leaving, that word is like the most used word probably of all of them, I don't know, there are ways in which we're inheriting these prefabricated notions, and so it's really hard to sift through those, right?
Yeah, it makes me think, I feel like Sweet Honey in the Rock has this song called Would You Harbor Me? And I think it boils down to that. Like, at a time when the population, when the borders that delineated what we now call the United States of America, at that time, the population within those lines, then just the amount of people was smaller. And so there was a way that people could create networks to help. That oftentimes it boiled down to like, oh, you can stay here for the night. I won't tell anybody. As opposed to like, we're not going to see like portraits in a gallery of like this person, these were the conductors. It wasn't so much of that. And I guess the question for us now is like, how can we offer that same justice to people who need it? Like, is there a way that we can offer like shelter and refuge to people who are being turned away at our borders right now?
Yeah. Like work outside of the law. Yeah.
Where is the play going after Greenwich House?
We don't know yet.
Not sure.
Can you please take it like everywhere?
It's up to you.
If you want these two in your town.
We're not sure. There are discussions and there are places that are interested in the piece, but
we're hoping we get to Canada.
Just like in the Underground Railroad.
I didn't want to.
Yeah. In some respects. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you for your and congratulations.
Thanks for talking.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, we hope you enjoyed that interview, and thank you to Ars Nova and Greenwich House Theater for hosting us in their delightful upstairs space. Like, check out this wallpaper. Don't you want this in your house?
There's like there's a great comet, and there's like
It's
something.
custom.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And thank you, Scott and Jennifer. Like, we're looking forward to seeing the show. Like, I hope it runs forever.
Yes. Same. Like, if you could make an uncomfortable comedy about any topic, what would you do?
I don't know, because nothing really makes me uncomfortable.
Same.
So,
I'm like Samantha Jones. I'll try anything.
yeah.
Well, thank you all for watching, and thank you again, Ars Nova. If you like watching us, please subscribe and leave a comment if you have any suggestions for things or people that we should talk to and talk about. Anything you want to say to the people?
Have fun at the theater.
Have a good summer. Put on sunscreen. Bye.